So I'm still not sure if I should give the talk in English or in Russian, to be honest. It's a matter of negotiation. So who doesn't speak Russian? Ooh, the entire crowd. Okay, that's fair. So I hope that everybody fine with me speaking English. So it's good for me to be back, actually. It's wonderful to see the community growing, and it's wonderful to make these connections. I was sitting in a coffee shop in Zerno the entire day, preparing for the session and the talk and stuff, and I was crying. I was crying a little bit. Mostly because the stuff I'm going to talk about is a little bit sad. So when you think about, the last session of a day, it's supposed to be exciting and supposed to be so kind of bringing all the energy together. That's not going to happen. This is probably going to be one of the saddest talks I've ever given, because the state of things when it comes to privacy is a little bit awkward and weird. But let me ask you first. Some of you might have heard the word GDPR. Anybody familiar with the term? Yes. So now I have to ask you, who honestly think that this is a total waste of time for everybody? That is totally unnecessary, should be gone, and all of it. Anybody? Maybe 15 people. Who believes it's a really good thing that should bring the humanity forward? Like 10 people, and everybody else is like, I don't care anymore at this point. Well, today the talk is not just about GDPR, but some of the implications that GDPR has. And so, test, everything is fine, but some things you're going to see today you will not like, or they will be awkward or strange, and I do not take any responsibility for what happens next, because some of the examples are a little bit awkward, to say the least. Now, let me just jump in. Sorry, I just have to jump in here a little bit. Now, privacy is a very interesting topic. And in many ways, it's a very complicated topic, because when you start thinking about privacy, what you need to keep in mind when designing and building for it, there is a huge amount of information you have to get through, and also a lot of information that you have to understand first, because most of it is kind of related to the way we're kind of not thinking about the web. What do I mean by that? If you think about the state of the web today, over the last few years or so, it was wonderful to see a lot of exploration, experimentation, crazy things showing up with a lot of really cool identity, brand identity, where we kind of used to be stale for a while. Things used to be just a little bit boring. But now things are really getting all crazy and upside down, and everything is cool again, which is wonderful. But at the same time, it comes at the cost of experimentation. So very often you will see websites like this, right, where things are a little bit off. Would you want your website or your application that you're working on today to look and work like this? Some of you, maybe. But the problem with it is not necessarily that it's kind of glitchy and weird and a little bit strange. It's just inaccessible, and that's a real problem, right? So when you think about people using the web, in many ways we're not thinking about every individual, but a mass of individuals. And this is a problem that actually very clearly becomes important when we talk about privacy. Now, this is the state of the web today. I don't know about you, but I'm old, okay? I'm not that old, but I'm old. So I remember vividly, like 20, 25 years ago, the web used to be different. It wasn't as explosive as we saw in the previous examples, but it wasn't like this. Now, how many of you have experienced this before, right? You go to a website. It's still a thing in 2019. You go to a website. So what do you see instead of, the website? You see a couple of bars, a cookie consent prompt, because why not? A notification prompt, because why not? Maybe you want to install an app, because who doesn't? Right? And maybe you want to sign in with something because who doesn't like signing in, right? Or this thing where you end up like with a beautiful cookie consent prompt at the bottom. We value your privacy, and you get to choose how much value you want to give to them, right? And so this is a really awkward experience for many people. So when I was working in Amsterdam in February, and I was running a couple of interviews with students, I was shocked and very disappointed, frankly, by how people see the web, right? Because nobody really I mean, this young generation, people who are maybe 15 to 20, right? They don't like the web because this is what they see most of the time, right? And this is really, really disappointing. And at the same time, it's not even that happens sometimes. Sometimes you want to do something really boring, like booking a ticket. You want to go to a cinema. What's wrong about going to a cinema? Nothing, right? So you want to book a ticket, and you end up with this horrible experience where you get this pop-up. You want to close it, and it opens in a new tab. You want to close it still, and then it opens again in a new tab, because why not, right? And eventually, if you actually do want to buy that ticket, this is the interface that you're presented with, right? Please check that the film, date, session, and the information shown above is the one you have selected for your movie ticket, since you will not be able to make purchases or refunds when the purchase is finished. Remember that you must present your credit card and official ID when selecting your tickets at the box office of your selected Yelmo cinemas. And keep going and going. You want to give somebody money. Imagine going to a grocery store here when you want to buy your cottage cheese, because I like cottage cheese, and then they present you with this. That would be very awkward and very unpleasant in many ways. And you also end up with these beautiful websites. I mean, we know how to create websites like this. It's beautiful. You have a really wonderful video playing at the start, because everybody at some point of their life wants to buy a boat, right? I mean, who doesn't? And also, you want to be able to build your own boat, not just buy a boat. That's just boring. You want to build your boat. So you select a model. That's how it usually works. And then you get presented with this. They give you half a carousel, not a full carousel, half a carousel right here, right? And then 2 hamburger icons for this, for the cost of 1. That's nice, right? And then you try to figure out, how the hell does this work? What does it even mean? And how do I kill this? And then you realize, there is a checkbox, hide summary. I click that one. And then, but then it appears again, right? And you're about to give somebody 1 million euros or so, and that's the interface they give you. That's a little bit disrespectful, right? Or this is my favorite example ever. A bank insurance form, a beautiful corporate bank insurance form, where they ask you a couple of questions. One question is very, very specific, namely, do you have children? And there must be somebody somewhere sitting in front of Photoshop or Sketch or whatever at some point of their life thinking, do you have children? Slider. This must be a slider, right? And the slider has this property. Slider has a minimum value and a maximum value. Now, the minimum value is quite obvious. It has to be 0, I guess, right? But what should be the maximum value? Who is going to decide what the maximum value is going to be? Now, luckily, they made a decision for you, so you don't have to think about it, because the maximum number is 5. You can have at most 5. Now, if you're really clever, like because, if I look at you, you're clever people. You'll figure it out. So if you're clever, you'll be able to click on the pencil, so that thing turns into an input field. Then you can change it to 6 or 7 or 8 or whatever, but the interface will tell you, 5, right? Now, isn't it respectful and wonderful? And you see it all over, right? Or this is like a really, really bad usability, but it's all over. People get confused. So you're supposed to, in order to authenticate, to type in the 6-digit number you're getting via SMS, right? So this is an input field where you're supposed to type it in, right? And approximately 7 times, a person who looks at its interface, will accidentally click this button, thinking that this is supposed to be, OK button, but this is the OK button, right? So they get the code resubmitted, resent 7 times. And this is just, regular broken interfaces. Or this one. And, I promised you dirty and weird and awkward. So if you don't like bugs or insects or anything related to all of that, please close your eyes now, because it's not going to be beautiful. But somebody must be sitting in front of Photoshop or Sketch thinking, that's the one, right? So here is the beautiful website that allows you to track and kill bugs. And specifically, it's a very interesting piece of design, because I can almost think about a designer thinking, let's add a little bit of red just a little bit, just the right splash. That would make it really stand out, because this is what we want to do. And a slider with a bug. How often do you see that in your life, right? Almost never. Until you get to kind of go to the configuration mode, where you get to select the best tool for the killing experience, right? And you answer a couple of questions, like where this is going to affect you, and then boom, here's the solution. And the best part, there's exactly one product they're selling, right? But, why not have a configurator instead? That sounds like fun. Or this beauty. I'm like an elephant. I never forget. I never forget Ryanair. This was the site like many, many years ago. Anybody has a deep feeling of belonging to Ryanair? Commitment, loyalty, or anything of that kind? Maybe anybody has a feeling of hate, disappointment, annoyance, anything? Nobody cares about Ryanair. Okay, that's fair. That's fair. But I will never forget this moment when they had this beauty in the interface. When you book a flight with Ryanair, the insurance is added for you automatically unless you opt out. But you need to know how to opt out to opt out. Because to opt out, you need to find "Don't insure me" conveniently located between Finland and Denmark. Isn't that nice? Right? Who doesn't like interfaces like that? It's just a piece of beauty. And then we got better. Over the last few years, we got so much better at tricking people and cheating people and making them do things that they're not supposed to do. Like, email marketing is an important thing. So when you realize that an email has been sent, but it has been seen already, people are not going to click again to see it. So we can trick them into thinking that they haven't read an email yet by adding this bubble, or a similar bubble, right here in the subject line, because we can, right? Or this, like this was making rounds on Instagram all over, Nobody likes to have hair or dirt on their phones, so let's just Photoshop in a hair, right? So people will start clicking, and yes, they start clicking, and yes, this increases engagement rates short term, because they will never come back, right? And then somebody said, no, we can do better. Let's add some dirt. Just a little bit of dirt. So people start scratching. Boom, increasing conversion rate, increasing engagement rate, everything works like magic. And then somebody said, no, we can do better. Let's do push notifications. Who doesn't like a good push notification? Who actually signs up, subscribe to at least one, or at most one, just one push notification? Anybody? Maybe 6 people. I will have to talk to you later. I'm very interested, very interesting. And you get this beautiful copywriting, like a genius copywriting. My medic would like to send you notifications. No, I do not want to stay alive. Oh, yes. You have 2 options, essentially. Or this one, a little bit of hate relationship going on here. Want to stay on top of everything? Sure, of course. Or no, I'm boring. Oh, isn't that nice? Right? So this is the world we become. I mean, it's not because we want to make this kind of things to trick people or to cheat people. Because in the end, we try to make things look nice. But as a result, we also end up doing things in a bit weird way for the sake of marketing very often. So anybody can spot anything weird going on here? Anything weird? So you have add to basket, which leads you to the basket, but it adds insurance for the shoes, which you of course need, because who doesn't like an insurance for the shoes, right? Or you can also add to basket, but without insurance, right? Unfortunately, it actually goes in the wrong direction, right? So this is just a mock-up, it doesn't exist, but we're very, very good at actually nudging people into doing certain things. There are many, many examples of this. Some of them are real, some of them are not, right? And this brought us to a place which is really awkward to many, many people, right? And then this started happening. I don't know about you, but I don't feel comfortable that when I watch YouTube videos, all of a sudden, my CPU is being used for Bitcoin mining without my consent. That's not very nice. I wouldn't want that. So we started fighting back. And so we started fighting back with ad blockers first. Anybody using an ad blocker? Okay, anybody not using an ad blocker? we also will need to have that conversation later. That's very important, right? So when you think about ad blockers, then to think about people blocking ads. But I don't think that it's ads that people actually actively blocking. If you look at a newspaper, right? Newspapers have advertising. I mean, okay, nobody reads newspapers at this point. But if you have a journal or magazine, advertising doesn't really bother you that much. It's the tracking that really bothers you. And that's a real problem. And so this war has been ongoing. I don't know if you actually noted spotted it. It's incredible. The war of ad blockers against ad blockers, blockers against ad blockers, 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 where everybody is trying to block everybody else. So if you look and go in Facebook, right, they use, I think, 5 divs, 9 spans, and 30 CSS classes to obfuscate the word sponsored so it's not blocked out by common ad blockers, right? And so if you look into the code, it's a piece of magic. It's really magical because nobody knows what it does, right? And it keeps changing randomly every day, so ad blockers cannot catch up, right? So this is the war that's been ongoing, right? At the same time, if you go on Twitter, it's actually going to be very similar, right? Every time you want to look up something that's, if you have something pinned, because there are also extensions that filter things out, and kind of adjust things and so on, you'll find a lot of this happening, right? Essentially, many classes that just obfuscate for the sake of not being detected by ad blockers, right? But we are good at this, aren't we? So if they're blocking, we'll find a way. And in fact, we are finding a way really well. So I was thinking for a long time that I'm special. My mom told me that I'm special, so I thought that I'm special. And I'm using an ad blocker, and I care about privacy, and I care about cookie consent prompt blockers and all of that. And I was very surprised and shocked that I'm not alone. Especially between the teenagers, between 15 and 18 years old, many people will be using an ad blocker by default. Many people will be using something like this, or something like this, or something like this, which was a really big surprise for me. So like blocking Facebook was not an exception across a small group of people. It's a big statement that most people actually are preferring these days, right? And then you have a newcomer, stop chat pop-ups, because nobody likes chat pop-ups either. And then you have this wonderful tool succeeding massively, easily unsubscribe from spam emails. Unluckily, or unfortunately, they also collect data that they also forward to other companies sometimes, so you have to be really careful about that. And you also end up with these extensions. I don't care about cookies extension or clickbait removal for YouTube extension, which replaces all the thumbnails that are added in for the sake of being clickbaity with real images from real videos, right? And so if I look at the state of things today, it's a really strange state of things. So we have one thing that's very, very clear. Nobody likes pop-ups and models. Immediately, the moment you see one, you're clicking it away without even looking at it, if you want to read an article or do something on a site. Nobody really loves push notifications. It's really rare that people subscribe to them, but if they do, people tend to be very, very selective about that. Nobody likes really chat window pop-ups unless they really need one, but once they block them, there is no way back. Then whenever you see the toolbar at the top, download the app, it's going to be dismissed right away. If you ask somebody to import contacts, so you can spread the word about the application, that's not going to happen because many people have been burned in the past, especially with wonderful practice that LinkedIn used to have for a while. You would add and import contacts, and all of a sudden, all your contacts will get notification about the wonderful application that you're using, right? Nobody likes that. Video autoplay, nobody likes that either. Geolocation permission, it needs to be something really important for you to grant access to your geolocation. GDPR cookie consent, it's okay. Well, whatever, that's okay, I have nothing to hide. Advertising is blocked. Then whenever somebody asks you to turn off an ad blocker, no way. You'll find a way with DevTools, you'll go into incognito mode or anything. There is no way you're going to turn off ad blocker for them, right? Access to camera photos, blocked. Syncing contacts, nope. Email input, that's an interesting one. That's an interesting one. Because if somebody asks you to sign up with your email address, well, you have more than one email address, don't you? And you have a very special email address. A very, very special email address. An email address that has all kind of really interesting emails in it. Fake accounts, strange third-party services that you never liked, a lot of spam, newsletters, all of that, the stuff you never check. So whenever somebody asks you to sign up in an email, let's say at an airport, because you want to get access to Wi-Fi, no way you're going to give them the proper email address. And I really would love to see the database of all the creative emails that people have in an airline database. And same thing whenever somebody asks you to sign in with, let's say, Instagram or Twitter or Facebook. Let's have it. So how many of you would, if you are, let's say, at the Wi-Fi at the airport, and you want to sign in to the Wi-Fi, to get the Wi-Fi, and you have an option to sign in with Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or email, who would use Twitter? 4 people, 6, 7 people? Who would use Instagram? Maybe 15 people. Who would use Facebook? Okay, maybe 25. Well, of course, there is a Kontakte, so probably some of you would use it as well. Who would use email? Yes, and that's probably not going to be the first-class citizen email, will it? Probably not. Right? So whenever you want to get access from somebody, like get an email from somebody, or get the social sign-in, it's going to be trouble. And then there is this beauty, capture, because who doesn't like a good capture? Especially if it's an old implementation. We'll talk about it in a moment, right? Nobody likes that. And then very often, almost every single time, I get so frustrated because I hear this all the time, but I have nothing to hide. So if I'm being honest now, or if you're being honest, so, is it privacy a thing? Is it something that's really important? Or do we all have nothing to hide? So who believes that you have nothing to hide? That's okay. We'll have to talk later as well. We have to have so many conversations now. Because I think if you have nothing to hide, would you be perfectly fine with giving me access to your search history? Like Google search history? All of it, maybe? Maybe also your emails? Maybe also all the contacts you have in your social network? And this is a really dangerous statement because very often you end up with this, right? So there is this term that's been coined recently, which is menstrual surveillance, where essentially there are many, many apps that allow you to track your periods. But then what's interesting is that this data, because you signed up for the service, so of course you give access to that data to third parties, they collect all the data. Sometimes they anonymize it, sometimes they don't, and they sell it to managers who you're working for. Isn't that nice? Right? And this is just the state of things. On the other side, if you have nothing to hide, how often did it happen to you in your life, maybe recently, that you are maybe, just looking, like thinking, or just Googling for shoes, and all of a sudden, 2 minutes later, they show up in Instagram, and they show up on Facebook, and they show up in your Google search results, and all over because, you wanted shoes, right? And it's not about, this particular thing. Of course, we are customers and consumers, and we want to buy certain things, but would you want your data to be public like this? Imagine if you want to get another job at another company. You probably wouldn't want your boss to know about you looking for another job, right? And there are many, many personal details that you really don't want to give away that freely. And this is just, just an example for that. There is a pregnancy app that is selling data to your managers if they want to get access to it, right? There is a health insurance business which is really, really, really cares about your data. So all these companies that show up all of a sudden, they want to get access to the data because it's a really valuable asset. This is the most important asset that we have on the web today, right? Because once they have a profile of what you know, they can give you different interest rates. They can give you different health insurance rates based on what they know about you, even although you might not know about it, right? Here's another thing. Who believes that this is true, that your phone is actually listening to what we're all saying now? And it's okay or it's not, right? It's remarkable. You start talking about Jamaica. I encourage you to talk about Jamaica today for the entire, the rest of the day. Just mention it maybe 15, 20 times in a conversation about Jamaica, because Jamaica is a really good place. I'm just wondering how many of you will wake up tomorrow morning and see all kind of interesting advertising about Jamaica and how wonderful Jamaica is and how incredibly powerful it is to actually get to explore Jamaica and travel to Jamaica and buy tickets to Jamaica, because I'm pretty sure that most of you will see this showing up tomorrow. And this is actually happening. on our watch. And of course, the phone is listening. And if you actually look into some data, Facebook alone has 1,000 triggers, right, that it actually activates certain things to based on what you say. Probably words like buy, or words like see, or like watch, or things like that. So it's actually happening behind the scenes. So I really highly encourage you to turn off access to microphone for your Facebook or any other application that you're using that you don't need access to, right? And in fact, this is kind of a real thing, which makes me very, very sad, right? So from time to time, snippets of audio do go back to apps like Facebook servers, but there is no official understanding why that happens. It just happens accidentally, or more or less accidentally, without our consent very often, right? So looking into this, the most dangerous thing that really makes me angry is this last bit, which I really highly encourage you to rethink. Mostly because it's really not about hiding something. It's about having this very special moment with somebody and sharing that special moment with them and nobody else, right? In the same way, like you wouldn't want your partner to find out about you getting an engagement ring before you ask for propose for engagement. That would really ruin the experience, right? This is a really, really important thing. And these companies know much better than they think. There is this famous study where it's enough to have 100 Facebook likes and you can actually predict the profile of a person very accurately, right? Both religion and sexual orientation and how much you're drinking, how much you're smoking and all of that. Just 100 likes. And companies capitalize on that, right? And don't get me wrong, I'm not one of those privacy fanatics or lunatics who go around talking to people, kill all the apps and use your wooden phone, right? But it's a really important thing that we need to think about. Because one of those companies, the Axiom, they compile profile on 2 billion people with over 10,000 attributes, points, so they know everything about you. They probably know about you more than you know about yourself, and your family knows about yourself, and your friends too, right? Which is a very, very dangerous thing, because you don't really know what's going to happen to this data. And so a very nice example for that is to look into what actually we can do with it. It's one thing to be aware of this issue, but what can we do with it? Well, when you install WhatsApp, for example, right, by default, you just provide consent, you agree, and then you start using the application. But when you actually look up these terms and conditions, this is where this checkbox will be, right? Do that, or I allow WhatsApp to get access to my, to use my data or not, right? So we have to be really, really careful. And in fact, as you noticed, of course, the law is coming to change it. And I made it my personal commitment to read every single privacy policy for the last month that I will be stumbling upon. I mean, it takes time. So if you want to look into your Google's privacy policy, you need to reserve a Sunday, at least, right, to really understand what's going on. And it's remarkable. I highly encourage you to do that. And the second thing that I always do, whenever I get this cookie consent prompt, I always explore options of how to opt out. And as you will see in a second, it's very, very interesting to see what you can do there, what you need to know, what you need to do there. For example, F-Secure is a provider for Wi-Fi and for cell data and so on. And when you sign up for the service, you agree to assign your firstborn child to them for the duration of eternity. And that's not a joke, by the way. I mean, they actually confirmed that they don't want to enforce the clause, but by law, they could have, right? Game is also interesting. GameStation asks to grant them a non-transferable option to claim, for now and even more, your immortal soul. Should we wish to exercise this option, you agree to surrender your immortal soul and any claim you might have on it within 5 working days. Right? Because why not? Anybody using Amazon? Have you read Amazon's privacy policy? Amazon has a tool which is called Lumberyard, which is essentially a tool for building games, right? Game engine tool. So if you actually spend a bit of time looking into the beauty of AWS service terms, which is a fantastic reading material for Sunday night, it's really, really good. Eventually, if you're paying attention, you will be hitting a clause. It takes a while. But you will be hitting a very important, a very interesting clause. We'll get to it. Stay with me. Stay with me. Right here, which essentially says it's an AWS zombie apocalypse clause. This restriction will not apply in the event of the occurrence, certified by US Centers for Disease Control and successor body, of a widespread viral infection transmitted via bites of contact with bodily fluids that causes human corpus to reanimate and seek to consume living human flesh, blood, brain, or nerve tissue, and is likely to result in the fall of organized civilization. And it's not a joke, by the way. It's real close that actually does exist, right? There are many, many other examples, but I do want to show something else before that. Every single one of them, whatever you're using, will be not particularly nice, except Tumblr. Tumblr is actually very respectful and very nice and very friendly. But when Google Chrome was introduced, right, and this is pretty much the standard these days, pretty much everything you would type in the search box, any URL you would type in, any data you want to upload, anything you do in the browser will belong to Google, right? Instagram, anybody using Instagram? I'm sure you do. On Instagram, this is everywhere. You grant an non-exclusive, royalty-free, transferable, sub-licensed, worldwide license to host and do with your data whatever you want. The same goes for Twitter. And of course, every single one of them may use your data in any way they like without giving you any compensation. Anybody using Tinder? Okay, that's a very personal question. I'm sorry. Tinder uses gyroscopes and accelerometers to see how much you tilt the device when you swipe left or swipe right. This information is also collected. Anybody has heard of the wonderful new thing called Face App? Anybody tried Face App? Do you know what you signed up for? Face App, you grant Face App a perpetual, irrevocable, non-exclusive, royalty-free, worldwide, fully paid, transferable, sub-licensable license to use, reproduce, modify, adapt, publish, translate, create derivative works from, and so on and so forth. But what's important as of what they have now and what they will develop in their company during their lifetime, right? And even better, they also, and I like the clause also, they also use a device identifier which may deliver information to us or third parties so we can track and give you better advertising, right? So this is a very sad state of things. So actually looking into the terms can be very, very helpful. Now, I mean, I can actually just repeat it, but that's pretty bad, right? So let's make it better, right? Because we can. If we look into what we can do, there are certain things we can definitely do today. Many people would argue that it's about time to introduce this notion of ethical design manifesto, and this is the concept that came up by Indy, and it's a really great thing, but I have a really hard time thinking that you can sell ethics or an ethical approach to your managers or your clients or anybody. Ethics alone is not going to be enough. You have to really translate these terms or the things that you want to change into something that businesses can understand. Because very often we think that this is okay because it increases conversion. It does, right? You will upsell easily if you do this, right? It's very hard to argue about, no, we shouldn't do it because it's the wrong thing to do. This is not going to fly. You kind of have to work around. But the thing is, the landscape has changed a lot. Some of you might have seen this recently, or the last couple of days. It was making news. So this woman sat down on this chair. It doesn't have a back. I'm just saying, it doesn't have a back, right? And this is an EasyJet flight, airplane. It was flying from to Geneva, from London to Geneva, right? And he made this picture and posted it on Instagram. And she wasn't flying in that seat. She just took a seat because she was speaking with somebody else. It went all viral. EasyJet had to close down for a while because they had no idea what's happening, right? And one photo like this can really brutally change the company altogether, right? It's so massively powerful. Now, can you think for a second, how come that it happened? One photo on Instagram, on Twitter, sorry, what's a big deal, right? It's incredible in which world we're living today because one single photo can unite people who don't like a particular brand in a way that was not possible before, right? We have an immense power to do that, right? An average person today has 150 Facebook friends and 707 Twitter followers. We're never alone, and we're really good at finding people who are like us, so we can really connect and build something. So one mistake can go viral very quickly, and the other thing that we have at our disposal is the power of negative reviews, right? This has made every single company that uses this kind of dark patterns really be afraid, because the impact of negative reviews is really, really bad for business, right? And in fact, we're also very, very good at kind of finding workarounds. There are Ryanair survival guides right? Because people are really good at cheating people or companies that want to cheat on us. And the reason why we actually don't pay that much attention to this issue altogether is because there are many, many hidden costs involved. We think that dark patterns are great because they increase conversion, and they do, but at the same time, we have to think about something else as well. We have to think about those costs that actually appear without us thinking about it directly. Because if you increase conversion, it's a very short-term thing, but that customer who will be disappointed, he will not be back. They will not be returning very soon, right? And then there are also returning processing costs, cost of price of support, and so on and so forth. So one first thing, which is really important to think about when you think about improving long-term in general, is to look away from just the general concept of increasing conversion towards a nice mix of different things. Many companies that I'm working with started introducing slightly new and different metrics, like, for example, time to repeat purchases in an e-commerce site, right? Or recommendation strength. How often does it happen that somebody actually recommends a product or recommends a brand to somebody else, right? Time to first share. How much time passes by between you creating an account, right, and actually recommending it to somebody else? Actually using some of these database collections to track what is happening there. The same goes for time to first purchase, time to first upgrade if you have, let's say, pricing plans or pricing tiers, right? Performance metrics, obviously, different custom things that you will do there. Trying to identify some sort of lifetime value, which is not related necessarily to what you do in your conversion, but you're kind of trying to look at the bigger scope of things, so what's going to happen for the next year or so, right? And so there are many other things here as well, where we measure sales and marketing costs, and we try to reduce customer support, negative feedback, total cost of refunds, negative reviews, marked as spam. It's a very, very important thing as well. For most companies, email marketing is the most dominant thing that's going to bring revenue. So once you're marked as spam, it's really hard to get out. So you probably don't want that. So you have to really think around how do you adjust frequency of your notifications, for example. And then very often you will end up with this turnaround score. Anybody heard of it? Turnaround score? Essentially, if a customer has a bad experience, how often do you manage to turn this bad experience into a good one? Because very often, if somebody has a really big problem with your brand, if the problem gets resolved quickly, right, or if something happens that actually helps you rather than actually annoying you, then you become a loyal customer. So this is a very valuable thing as well, to see how often do you actually get to translate people who are really annoyed to people who like your brand. And one little tool for that is a tool called System Usability Scale, where you ask a couple of questions, tend to be specific, you can look it up. And then, because people are biased, you can calculate a score and track it over time, long term. Not just conversion, right? But really thinking long term about how your brand is perceived altogether, right? But there are also a few other things that are important to note. For example, it's probably not a good idea to ask information that we don't need. Very often when you actually start gathering data, all this data gets saved somewhere, and especially because of GDPR, it's your developer's responsibility to make sure that when somebody requests to delete it, you delete it, and you prompt all third parties, they might be using that data, to delete it as well, and all fourth parties that are using third parties as well. Right? So you might not want to get into this trouble altogether. So for example, in Carlsberg, whenever they ask you how old you are, right, they don't ask for your birthday, they just ask for the year, and because sometimes a year would be enough. And if a year is not enough, then they will be asking for the month and for the day, right? So you can ask only what you need and not more, because in the end, it will also actually cost you, also because of GDPR. Now, who wants chocolate? Okay. Anybody else? Okay, this is птичье молоко, так что. Okay, I have more, I think. Hold on. I had more. It was stolen from me. I had all this box of chocolate here somewhere. No? Interesting. Okay, anybody wants a ball? Anybody? But the further, the better. I'll make it dramatic. Okay, last throw. Ready? If you can find the chocolate, I just don't know where it is, actually. Strange. Doesn't matter. Okay, ready? Okay. Oh. Okay, so I just have to get. So if you don't like chocolate, I have bananas and kefir. Just saying, right? So anybody wants a banana? Seriously? I'm going to do this. I don't know if I should. Okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to be very careful, I promise. You can stand up at this point. Yes. You ready? Yeah, close enough. Okay, you want the chocolate, I think. Right. So I can have more later. Okay. Whew. Now everybody's awake again. That's good. Another thing that also shows up quite a lot is we often give binary options, right? So it's not about gender, but very often we stick to female or male. But for many people, it's not about kind of the way they identify themselves, but many people feel very uncomfortable giving that information away because they know for sure how this information will be used, right? So if you actually can, it's a good idea to provide an option other or prefer not say. And in general, always providing a way out, right? Because for many people, this will be the only option to continue, right? Now, we also, of course, have to talk about the beauty that showed up. May 2018. I spent 2 months researching on the impact of GDPR, on the beauty of interfaces that we ended up creating, and the impact it had on privacy. As of August 2018, only 5% of the 5,000 most popular websites, it was a year ago, right? Only 5% of 5,000 most popular websites actually provided a visible choice to decline giving away the data, which is not GDPR compliant. Which is why over the last years, lawyers have been busy. Lawyers have been very busy, especially filing wonderful lawsuits against big companies like Facebook and Google, of course, that do not provide GDPR compliant solutions. Many websites did crazy things. I mean, this is really ironic because this is actually on a website that actually highlights cookie prompt things and stuff. But some companies decided to do this, especially in the US. That's been wonderful to see. Like, sorry, but you're European. We're not going to give you anything, right? And the best part about it is, apparently, for some American websites, everything that's not American is European. Right? So you end up, nobody except America gets access to the website. Isn't that wonderful? And at the same time, sometimes people from Australia get European GDPR cookie consent prompts. Like, why? That's kind of a bit awkward, a bit strange. Other companies decided to do a better way. Let's have a free option for people who are willing to give us the data, or let's have a premium use subscription, right, which is a little bit more expensive, right? And some companies decided to do something entirely different. Because of GDPR, USA Today decided to run a separate version of their website for European Union users, which is much cleaner and much smaller. I actually prefer that one anyway, right? But then also, we see really bad patterns showing up. And this is really dangerous, and this is an important stuff for you to know. Because whenever you implement a GDPR solution, this is going to be most of the time the default, but this is not GDPR compliant. Now, you go to the site, you get the prompt about the cookies, and you have 3 options to click it away. Here is number 1. We're familiar with the concept of the close button. I think we are, right? Here is another one, right? Can you see the third one? Yeah, so if you click outside on New York Times, it constitutes a silent consent, which is not GDPR compliant at all. In fact, by clicking I accept or X on this banner, or using our site, just using our site by clicking around, you consent to the use of cookies unless you have disabled them, right? Which is a really, really big problem. So why do they ask you all of that if they do whatever they want anyway? And in fact, sometimes you click on, you cannot adjust, you can only accept, right? So if sometimes you adjust and you change things, but they save it anyway. So what is the point? Oh, this beauty. Now that's a glorious piece of design, unbelievable. So here you can select on device the preferences and stuff. And then, as you scroll down, there is no way to remove everything or disable everything. is you're going on a hunt, right? On a hunt to delete all the different trackers. And there are many of them. Why some of them are activated and the others are not, I don't know, right? But it took me 2.5 minutes to deactivate all of them, right? That's not a nice design pattern, is it? Right? And the same way, you see many of those things happening on other large sites, like let's say eBay, right? Where it's a very common thing. And it's, again, this is definitely not GDPR compliant, so I would highly recommend you to look into this, right? Another thing that shows up is, I'm going to block you until you accept, which is, again, the same thing. It's not GDPR compliant either, right? The only reason why these websites are not actually filed lawsuits against yet is because many lawyers are busy with bigger companies that have more money to pay, right? And so we see this blocking happening, this kind of stuff, this kind of silent consent and so on. But what would be actually better? Well, you can actually go ahead and play with it a little bit. One option is, of course, to do something like this, where you say, okay, the website uses cookies, but you need to provide an option to adjust. That's a very important one. And then you can group all the different things that are required, right? Obviously, only necessary should be activated by default. The others may not be activated by default, right? And then you kind of can adjust it later if you want to. Here on The Guardian, for example, a very similar thing, have a prominent call to action. Yes, I'm okay with that, but you also have a link to my options where you can choose what you want and what not. And you can choose between two options. I'm okay with personalized ads, or I'm not. And it's very clear, it's very obvious, you have the choice, right? Now, that's perfectly fine. On the other side, you find also many examples of this, right? Where you get to options, I accept or I do not accept, and then once you do not accept, you get to select what you want to have and what not, but there are two clear buttons, accept all and reject all. Now, all of this is not the best we can do, of course, right? Because ideally, we wouldn't even see it, which I will come to in a second. But so far, that's probably the best we can do, right? Another thing that happens sometimes, you come to the page, and then you actually get to select. It's not like I agree or I don't agree. You actually select if you want, if you're okay with this or if you're okay with that. And that's a prompt that shows up first. Now, this is probably not going to stay for long, which is really, really good. Because once you look into papers and academic papers studying this, people have very interesting behavior when it comes to GDPR cookie consent prompts. Namely, this study from Germany, targeting specifically Germany, found out that most people don't do anything when they see it. They just scroll by. They do not provide consent. They do not block it. They just ignore it, right? And it doesn't matter where you place it. The only thing that's interesting is when you have the dialogue at the bottom left or bottom right, have a higher probability of somebody accepting the cookies because it's really blocking the way, right? But most people don't even care that much, right? Here's another one where, again, no action is happening if you have a link that says data with privacy policy link or link that says cookies. But what's really surprising is that whenever you mention cookies, the acceptance rate goes down. So if you instead mention something like we care about your data, acceptance goes up, right? And most of the time, you will see this happening. I mean, it's a very boring slide, I'm sorry, but this is kind of the state of things, which actually came up just last week, where most of the time you will see these pop-ups at the top or at the bottom. Usually there is either no option at all, or you have to confirm, right? Sometimes choices are hidden, right? Most of the time, it's not blocking, right? So it's very rare that you actually see this blurring that's being blocked. Most companies will try to nudge you into giving the consent, somehow making an OK button very, very prominent and big, and making the other one smaller, right? You always have the link to privacy policy. You have cookies as wording, and a couple of other things, not so important. But this is the state of things. Now, the good news is that it might change soon, on the one side. On the other side, it's just the start. Because ideally, we wouldn't even have this. Why can't we have this instead? Right? You come to the site, please allow us to share information on you with 43 other companies. No, and that's it, right? But of course nobody would want that because we need data. We want to capitalize on data, right? But there is good news. And the good news is that there is an e-privacy directive that's actually being happening these days, as of now. Some of you might be familiar with the do not track mode. And the ultimate goal of the e-privacy directive now is very simple. When you set up in your browser that you do not want to be tracked once upon installation of a browser, for example, right? This header will be advertised to every single website that you're attending or you're visiting, and it's going to be your responsibility as developer to respect that header. And if somebody discovers that you're not respecting that header, then they can file a lawsuit against you, which makes much more sense. Totally screws up advertising industry, big time, right? But if this becomes the law, then we're talking about a very, very different thing. And this is, I mean, some of you must have heard of it, of course. No, track header, it's been supported for many years. It's around. It's just not really required to be supported by law, which is probably going to change this year. Right? And essentially, you have three options. You have three values. One, if the user doesn't want to be tracked. Essentially, you say that you want to be opted out. 0, in case the user actually consents to being tracked. So you want to opt in. Or null means no header is sent. And the real problem with the do not track header is the fact that the default behavior required by the standard is not to send the header at all. Which means that most of us will not be sending it, which also means that most companies don't have to respect it, which is probably going to change it. But if you look into the API, it's really well supported, except for Safari, but it has its own do not track mode anyway, so it's okay at this point. Right? So this is probably what the future will look like. But I have to say that this is just a starting point. As of now, this thing is happening where all of a sudden all the companies start getting fines for GDPR infringement. Right? Last year, just over the last 1 year, 95,000 complaints were filed. Right? And it's just a starting point because California is coming up with its own law that's going to get into force on January 1st, which is a bit different than GDPR, but that's also something you have to respect there as well. It's a little bit light GDPR, but still it's kind of the thing that's happening. And it's just a start, because just last week, there was this conversation about the new privacy law that has to come up in the US. Mostly because there are people, children, who access the web, and they're targeted with advertising very much the same way that we do. There are profiles on children, on their preferences, what they like, what they do, what they click, and how they interact, right? Now, of course, to collect this data about the child, you need the consent from the parent. But websites do not request any consent from the parent. So this law proposal that's happening in the US right now is prompting every single website that a child is visiting, which can be any website on the internet, to have a prompt, like a GDPR cookie consent prompt, asking if the child has parents' consent to access the site. Would you want to see this one adding up to your list of toolbars and your GDPR consent prompts? Probably not. So some sort of data legislation is happening one way or the other. It's just really up to us to fight back in case it becomes too much. Like with GDPR, where many companies saw, or legislation saw, that this is not going to work because this is not really respectful to what the intent was of GDPR. So this is why it's going to change, right? So this is why it's also very, very important to keep that in mind. And there was a really strange conversation that I was having with a friend a few months ago. Because, you know, if you think about doctors, you cannot become a doctor without having a license, right? If you want to be a lawyer, you have to study law and get your degree. So some conversations are happening about maybe developers should have a degree or license before they can actually develop. Maybe designers need to have a degree or license in order to design. Because if you think about the impact that we have with the tools that we're creating, I'm not talking about Facebook alone, but of course, like everything that we're creating, it has impact on people out there, and sometimes it's even more impact than the doctor could have. So maybe this might be controlled at some point. It's very scary, isn't it? Who would feel comfortable getting a license to be a developer? A few people. Who would feel very comfortable getting a license as a designer by some authority in somewhere in there? That's a very dangerous territory, right? But this is kind of the world we're living in. And then finally, I do have to mention one more thing, and then I'm really done. These beauties. Oh, don't get me started. I mean, they're mostly dead, but there is one important consideration to keep in mind there. Very often when you think about capture, we think about this, right? Somebody behind our backs looking how we type, gathering all the data and all the information and everything like that. And CAPTCHA has been around for quite some time, and the reason why it's kind of dismissed at this point, really, is because it's not effective anymore. On average, though, if you do use an older version of reCAPTCHA, on average, a user will need around 10 seconds to solve it, and it takes 28 seconds to solve the audio version. And 20% will actually give up after a few tries. Right? And as it turns out, as time passed by, bots got so advanced that there is no way that we can read out the letters without the bot not be able to do that, right? Which is why it's really becoming very important to actually not use CAPTCHAs the way we used to. But there are better things around the town, right? Some of you might know this, right? Of course. We actually have it in like invisible CAPTCHA. It's all wonderful and great. But if for some reason you're using a VPN, for example, and somebody gets suspicious, you end up with this beauty. Ah, who doesn't like them, huh? Ah, that's just beautiful, right? And then imagine you have this like street signs, right? And then that 1 pixel in that square, is it still a sign or not, right? So it becomes a real thing. And then eventually, of course, when you think about the spam prevention, most of the time we will be using reCAPTCHA, the new one, the new reCAPTCHA. But you kind of really need to have a strategy for it, right? Because in the end, you don't want your data to be used in some way. You want spam attacks to be blocked, right? And there are a couple of really simple things. You can start with using, of course, Akismet and others to block known spam IPs, ask random plain human questions like what color is the sun, this kind of thing. There's a honeypot technique where you have a checkbox that should be left unchecked and it's hidden. And then whenever a bot goes through it and checks it, then it's a sign that it's a bot. You can also use time traps, right? Because it's very unlikely that somebody who comes to your site will be able to navigate away from it, or like click on a submit button within 2 or 3 seconds. So you can have a time trap as well, and a couple of other things, and then load reCAPTCHA and others conditionally. And in fact, most of the time, CAPTCHA will be used. But it also brings us to another important thing, which is not just authentication with reCAPTCHA, but authentication in general. We tend to think that security is much more important than usability. And very often it's actually the other way around. Jared Spool said once that if the product is not usable, it's also not secure. Because if it's not usable, people start writing down passwords on post-it notes and put it on a laptop on display in order to remember it later, right? And it's really important to understand that when we think about authentication, we probably should be thinking about a slightly different way of authenticating today. And that's something that's not happening. As you can see, I like patents and academic papers and all. Anybody read this one? That's a very important one. That's a one-click checkout patent that was filed by Amazon in 1999. The interesting thing is that one-click checkout patent has expired last year, so everybody can go ahead and use it, the one-click checkout, right? In fact, if you look into Google patents, it will be also noted as expired. But I started thinking, how come that I have to authenticate myself maybe twice a year on Amazon, but I have to authenticate all the time on all the other services? They're just really, really strange. So if you think about how a one-click checkout works, it's actually really genius in many ways. So you have to create an account, but you don't have to do it normally. I mean, on Amazon, you have to create an account first. They do not provide an option to have one-click checkout then, but you provide some settings and you save some settings there. Then the moment you buy an item, it doesn't matter what you buy, of course, you have to provide your shipping details and payment details. And that's a very critical moment. Because at this moment, if you look into what happens in DevTools, they're storing cookies for 20 years. For 20 years, right? So drop the cookies, and then the one-click checkout option is activated by default, which is what they call one-click ordering at this point. And then this button shows up. And every time you click on the button, boom, you check out and you're done. And very often, no password is needed at all. Now, we tend to think that authentication is a binary state. You either logged in or you're logged out, and there is nothing in between. But in Amazon's case, whenever the cookie is set, and you actually ship to the same address, using the same credit card data, they're not going to ask you to log in at all. You don't even have to be logged in at all. So as long as you ship items to the same address that you have already used and authorized on the machine that you've already authorized at once, you don't have to enter your password for the next 20 years. And it's surprising that we haven't seen this being implemented anywhere, although the tools are here, right? Especially with the payment request API being available out there, right? And don't get me started about the beauty of two-factor authentication. Of course, it's great, but then many companies are doing this. Two-factor authentication, where you have to define the question, and then you have to select an answer, and so you have to sign in with your password, and then you have to select the right answer from that line. That's not a two-factor authentication. Two-factor authentication is when you have two separate things to authenticate with. Something the user knows, like a password, and something the user has, device a key, and also something the user is, sometimes if it's a biometric input, right? And this is very important to look into how we can maybe use something like one-click checkout more often instead of thinking about binary, logged in or logged out. Because actually, whenever people have to recover password, this is going to cost companies money. Okay, so I spoke a lot, but again, too much maybe. And it's a really dry topic, so nobody really likes speaking about privacy. But I think it's a very, very important thing to keep in mind. So when you think about everything that's happening today, this is where we are. We're very, very good at finding workarounds, right? We're really good if somebody wants to trick us and cheat us and make us do something, we'll find a way that it doesn't going to happen. Your data is really most precious asset on the web. The data regulations are coming, so we have to keep in mind what's going to happen next. We need to frame privacy discussion into business vocabulary, trying to find a nice mix of different metrics that we can track, not only short-term, but also long-term. We also need to explain what happens to the data. That means in forms, whenever you're asking for password, or whenever you're asking for birth date, whenever you're asking for gender or phone number, right? You really need to be very specific about why you need this data. How many of you do this, actually? When you have to type in the phone number in the form, right? You start typing your phone number, and then you would change the last 2 digits or so they can't track you. Anybody does that? Okay, I know you a little bit. Okay, so this is happening as well, right? Also, very important that most GDPR solutions out there, they have issues. So as long as it's not transparent, not clear, it's not GDPR compliant. So especially you can see this in one simple thing that started appearing recently, namely when one of the GDPR solutions, which is this one, some of you might have seen this before, Quantcast, is in big trouble at this point because the solution that they're providing is not GDPR compliant, so they now have a GDPR investigation going on there. So you have to be really, really careful about the solution that you're picking, right? So for example, this one seems to be much better. So if you don't know what to use, look into Consently. That's a pretty decent one, right? So with this in mind, I want to finish with just one single video. We spent a lot of time thinking about the tools and thinking about the libraries and the frameworks, but at the same time, maybe some of those things are not as important, because in the end, it's all about the humans that we're designing and building for. So I would love to see more apps like this.
You might wonder how blind people deal with everyday challenges. Well, normally the answer is simple. We're not that different from you. We play music. We go to school. We go to work. You get the picture. But sometimes the simplest things can be difficult, and we need a pair of eyes.
Connect to.
First available helper.
That's where you come in.
Establishing video connection.
Through your smartphone, Be My Eyes connects the blind with sighted people through a live video connection. Simply choose if you need help or want to help by the click of a button.
That's a nice picture of you and your family, Kelly. Is it for a present? Yes, it's a photo from my parents.
You can help just by installing the Be My Eyes app,
Prepped image.
and we'll notify you when someone needs your help. And if you're in the middle of something, don't worry. Someone else will step in.
That is way too old.
So, we get all excited about all the tools and all the startups that appear and all of that. But this kind of apps really change people's lives, not just on paper. So this is a really big deal. And I installed it, and I highly encourage you to do that as well. Right? I think if we had more applications like this in general, the world would be a much better place, really. And I want to finish, really, with the last video, which is the story of my life, in 45 seconds or so. And I show it all the time, because it's always the same. So it doesn't matter. I spend a lot of time looking into privacy, looking into cookies and all of that. It's so boring. It's so boring. I'm sorry to bore you with all of this stuff today. It's really kind of boring, and you see that, oh, that's not right. That's not supposed to happen. Let's pretend it never happened. And in the end, it feels like, many companies don't really feel like they care as they should care. And many implementations are really, really bad. So we can make it better. And the one thing to know, though, is it doesn't matter how much you work, you will never get it just right. So I want to finish with this, and then questions and everything else. So this is my world. Oh, this is my world. It's a little bit sad, but in a good way. So frustrating. Oh, so sad. Sad. Thanks to Parallel Studio for the videos, but I have cats and things, and meow.